So the idea is that the suggestion that Laban suggested was not what was ultimately agreed to by Jacob. How so? Laban wants to imply that there's a pact, but the pact means that Laban offers security to Jacob, and Jacob is sort of part of his clan. And Jacob rejects that. And Jacob basically says the idea is that we're two separate entities and we're not going to harm each other. We're not going to cross the border to do evil to each other, and basically downgrades the meaning of the pact. Not that I'm part of you, but I'm separate and independent. And that's what happens at the end. And like we mentioned last week, the emphasis that Laban is trying to include himself with Jacob's family. He wants to make an oath. He takes an oath with the God. He includes the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father. And Jacob takes an oath in that same verse with the awe of his father Isaac, the dread of his father Isaac. So he's not going along with Laban. And they wake up in the morning and they have a wonderful day. That's chapter 32. And Laban awoke early in the morning. He kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. Then Laban went and returned to his place. So it's almost like it's the end of the era. We're not going to hear of Aram, that part of the family, anymore, right? So we started talking about how Abraham was commanded to leave Haran, come to Israel, but they kept going back. They went back, first of all, to find a wife for Isaac. Eliezer was dispatched. And then when they had some trouble, Rebekah sends Jacob to protect him from Esau, but also to marry back to Haran. And here, it's almost like a full separation, and that's what it seems is happening here. Okay, we discussed this last two verses because we contrasted it with the beginning of the parsha. So we spoke about it a few weeks ago, but I'm going to say it again very briefly, just for the sake of concluding the parsha. So verse 2, Jacob went on his way, and angels of God encountered him. Jacob said when he saw them, "This is a godly camp." So we call the name of the place Machanaim. Machaneh is a camp. Machanaim is plural, is camps. So Jacob is going, and the angels of God encountered him. And he names it Machanaim, two camps. Why two camps? If it says that my angels greeted him, so where do you see two camps? So Rashi explains that there are two categories of angels. He discussed this in the beginning of the parsha, we discussed the dreams. He says there's angels of Israel, and there are angels that are outside of Israel. And here, the angels from Israel, because he's coming from outside of Israel and going to Israel, so now the angels of Israel come out to greet him. So now he's got both camps, the angels that are outside of Israel and the angels within Israel. That sort of ties to the beginning of the parsha. Beginning of the parsha, we saw the image of the dream, and we saw the image of the ladder in the dream. And in the ladder, it said that Jacob sees Malachei Elokim, the angels going up and coming down. And we discussed that. We said, why are angels going up? They should first descend. The premise is that the starting point of angels are in heaven and they descend. So I said that story with Ruzhiner, that he said he can't ask questions on a dream. But Rashi says that the reason why the angels first descend is because we're talking about the angels from Israel. The angels from Israel are going up because they sort of finished their job, quote unquote. And then the angels descending are the angels that are outside of Israel who are now coming to greet and escort Jacob. And now, so the reverse is happening 20 years later. That's the beginning of the parsha. This is the end of the parsha. There's 20 years in between. At the end of the parsha, Jacob is at the end of the parsha, Jacob is coming back to Israel. The angels of Israel are coming toward him. That's why he says Machanaim, two camps. Right? So far, so good. Makes sense? More or less. Okay. I said the Hasidic commentary on this, and the Hasidic commentary is as follows. The parsha, as we mentioned, begins and ends with angels. In the beginning, he sees angels. The end, he sees angels. But if you want to see the differences between those two groups of angels, between the two descriptions of the angels that he sees, that will tell you about, it's not just a technical thing, but also tell you about how Jacob changes, right? So you talk about a story. So in the story, the plot develops. but you also have to look for the character development. How did the character change? So my daughter had a assignment. They get a silly story, and they say, show how the character changes. And she shows it to me, and I read the story, and I said, I'm sorry, I don't think the character changed. He should have changed, but he didn't. So she wrote her essay on how the character should have changed, but didn't. So, but I guess a good story is the character, if the character doesn't change, it's almost like a waste. Okay, what does it help me if the plot is shifting? The person has to learn something. So we want to look at the difference between the angels and say, Jacob was away for 20 years. Something has had to change. Okay, so he had married and he had children, but did he change? So the Hasidic answer is yes. And the way to see the change is to see the description of the angels, the way they appear in the beginning of the Parsha, the end of the Parsha, because when you have two similar stories, one way of analyzing the Bible is when you have two similar stories, that highlights not the similarities, but the differences. If you have two unrelated stories, it doesn't tell you anything, but two stories that are similar and yet different, so those differences become much more important. So that is the story we're looking for. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for how Jacob changes and how that plays out through the story of the angels, which basically sandwiches Parsha Vayetze when he leaves Israel, when he's coming back to Israel with the 20 years of quote unquote exile in the middle. So what happens over those 20 years? Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. I'm looking forward to see how the character changes. But before we do that, why the angels appeared again? Is it like a sign of approval that he handled the conflict well and parted ways with Laban?
Yeah, that's a question of the simple interpretation is that Jacob was promised by Hashem that Hashem will protect him. So you have the angels. What does the angels mean? Angels means creations that have wings and they're good looking. No, angels means the energy of Hashem that's coming with him, the blessing below that's protecting him. So the fact that he has the angels with him throughout the exile, throughout the challenges of challenges of Haran and Laban and the exile, that we understand. But Israel itself presents its own challenges, and we're going to see that instead of, you would think finally he comes back to Israel, you would say, oh, he lived happily ever after. Nothing could be further from the truth. His big problems begin when he comes back to Israel. Never mind his brother Esau, which is relatively easy to deal with. I don't know, easy, but he gets over that challenge. But then he has other challenges with the story of Shechem. His daughter is raped, daughter is kidnapped. They have to kill the whole, to get to a battle. And then ultimately the story of Joseph. So the land of Israel has its own challenges, and the exile has its own challenges. And we're always looking and saying, oh, if only my circumstances change, everything will be fine. No, the Galut, the exile has challenges, the homeland has challenges, everything has its own challenges. So we're saying that God, because of God's promise to protect Jacob, God sends everybody, the angels, the energy they need to survive, to overcome the challenges, but it's different angels. Different angels. It's not the same type of challenge. And when you come to a new circumstance, you can't come with the old tools, right? You have to, the way you deal with challenges will change dramatically. If you're in a foreign society, in a dangerous place, if you're in your own homeland, things start to change. And but everything ultimately comes from the help of Hashem, and that's the angels. That's what I would say.
So that's the first time after the initial appearance on the ladder. Yes.
Yeah, the first time you'll hear it. The first time was the ladder in the beginning of the parsha when he's leaving, and the second parsha, and the second time is here at the end of the parsha, and then in between there's also a dream. When he calls his wives on the way, when he wants to help them to leave Israel, to come with him to Israel, he talks about a dream he has, and he dreams about the sheep, and there in the dream, if you look back at chapter 31, verse 11, and the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, here I am. And he said, raise your eyes, if you please, and see that all the he-goats mounting the flocks are ringed, speckled, and checkered. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made me vow. Now arise, leave this land, and return to your native land. So again, he has a dream. In the beginning of the 20 years, he has a dream. There are angels going up and coming down. Then when he's in Haran, when it's time to leave, the angel tells him to leave. At least that's what he tells his wives. We don't read about the dream directly, but we read about that in his speech to his wives. And then when he comes here, when he comes back, when he's going toward Israel, the angels encounter him once again, angels. So now the question is, do the angels change? And does the description of the angels change? And does that reflect something, a development within Jacob himself? So if I remember correctly, I haven't read it inside in a while, but if I remember correctly, there's at least two major points. The first major point of differentiation between these two descriptions is that the first, when he was leaving Israel, he sees the angel in a dream. That happens both in the vision of the ladder, as well as the description we just read about, that when he was in Jacob's home and dealing with the sheep, he sees the angel coming to him. It's all in a dream, right? In the beginning of the parsha, it says clearly he dreamt. So if you look back, page 145, chapter 28, verse 12, Vayachalom, and he dreamt, and behold, a ladder was set earthward, and its top reached heavenward, and behold, angels of God were ascending and descending on it. So what do you see? It was a dream. What do you have at the end of this week's parsha? At the end of the parsha, Jacob went on his way, and angels of God encountered him. It doesn't say there was a dream. That is one difference. Another important difference is that who encountered who? If you look at the first verse of the parsha, again, Genesis chapter 28, verse 11, page 145, but it's the first verse of the parsha. Vayetze Yaakov, Jacob departed from Beersheba and went toward Haran. He encountered the place. Vayifka b'mokem, he encountered the place. So he encountered the place. Place is stationary. He happens to chance upon this place. At the end of the parsha, a very similar expression, which is not a common expression at all, but you have it in the beginning of the parsha and the end of the parsha. Jacob went on his way, and angels of God encountered him. He didn't encounter the place; they encountered him. So we have to deal with these two changes and see how Jacob advances spiritually. In short, the idea is as follows. Angels of God is the energy of God. Angels of God are everywhere. There's always angels of God. There's always the message that God is showing you. There's always the help that God is sending you. So the angels of God are everywhere. The question is, do you see it and do you recognize it? And it's harder to it's not always is it recognizable. Where do you sense a closeness to God? In the beginning of your spiritual journey, you sense your closeness to God, first of all, in a specific place. When Jacob passed the place of the temple, that's where he encountered the place. We discussed that the place is, what's the place? So the known place, means that we know about the place, but it doesn't say the place. But Rashi said, the only other place in Genesis, or maybe even in the entire Bible, where it says the place, is talking about Mount Moriah, where God tells Abraham, take your son and go to the place that I will show you. Hamakom, El Hamakom, to the place that I will show you. So the place, he encounters, the dream happens at the Temple Mountain. So where do you sense God in the beginning of your spiritual journey? In spiritual matters. When you go to a holy place, when you go to the synagogue, when you study Torah, that's when you sense a closeness to God. That's where you see the angels. Also, he sees the angels in a dream. In other words, in a dream is in a state when a person is sort of disconnected from the physical reality. And that's when you can dream about angels. But in the real world, you don't sense angels. First of all, you only sense it in a certain space. And even in the space, only when you're in a dreamlike state. You're not involved and you're not operating in the real world. Then you go to a distance. Then you leave Israel. You leave the holy place. Not only you leave the Temple Mountain, but you leave the entire Israel. And then you think you're farther from Hashem because you're in exile. You're in a distant place. And in this distant place, you have tremendous amount of challenges. But then you realize and you notice that Hashem helps you. And you learn to discover in the exile, ironically, in the exile, you learn to discover that Hashem is everywhere. Hashem is not only in the realm of the holy. And therefore, after the exile, what do you recognize? You recognize, first of all, you see God when you're awake, not in your dream, because you see how Hashem helped you in the real world. Okay, so that's why you don't see the angels in the dream. You see them in real life. And the point is here, they encounter you. You don't have to encounter them. In other words, you don't have to go to a specific holy place to sense godliness, but the godliness, you will see the godliness wherever you are. that godliness finds you. And that represents, give me a second, that represents that you're going to be able to get to the deeper truth. And the deeper truth of exile is that you recognize that Hashem is everywhere in every circumstance. You may not see it in the midst of the challenge. That's the other point here. He sees the angels, we don't read about him seeing the angels during the exile. He sees the angels coming back from the exile, right? So in other words, that's the culmination of the process. But what the exile accomplishes is that we see that even in the very challenging situations, Hashem was with us. So then we recognize that Hashem, you don't have to go to a specific place to see the angels, but the angels are everywhere. So that's the gist of the idea. We can elaborate upon it. Go ahead, Neil, please.
I remember learning a while ago that isn't there a concept in Judaism that God was not in Egypt, and the Jews could only kind of converse with God in Israel, and in Egypt was kind of a desert that they couldn't.
Okay, so this is already a complex issue. We have to start with the point that God is. Okay, so it depends which perspective you want to take. I'm going to come from the biased Hasidic perspective. Even before that, you're right. There are certain sources that say that you cannot experience revelation or a prophecy in Egypt. In fact, it says that Moshe in Exodus, it says many times, Moshe says, I'm going to go out of the city and I'm going to pray. And I'm going to speak to God outside the city. And Rashi says that in the city of Egypt, whatever the city means, where the people lived, he didn't leave the country of Egypt, but he left where the people live. There, the unholiness is too intense. So you're not going to experience revelation. And you have to go outside, and so you have to go out of the city to speak to God. We talk about prophecy in general. It also says that all the prophets, the commentaries say, Talmud says, all the prophets only prophesied in Israel. Okay, so there's a few exceptions, prophecies outside of Israel, but it says, or about Israel. In other words, even if geographically it's not in Israel, but it's sort of the subject of Israel. Okay, so it's clearly some places are holy, some places are unholy. But you're getting to the broader Hasidic, broader debate. That at some point was a very, very big debate. One of the dividing point between the Hasidim and those opposed to Hasidim. And that goes back to the question, to the interpretation of the Arizal. The question is God everywhere? And today, all the kids in preschool say Hashem is everywhere, but it's a very controversial subject. Not today, it's been accepted that Hashem is everywhere, but at some point, this is very controversial because, as Neil points out, there are places that are clearly unholy, and unholy means the absence of God. That's what we would assume, and therefore, there are places that are unholy. There are places where you're not allowed to study Torah because it's unholy. You can't study. There are places. If it's in a bathroom, if it's immorality going on there, you can't study Torah there. So there are places that God does not exist. And to say that God is everywhere is an affront to God. Why are you putting God in the negative places? And that's so there were schools of thought within Judaism that said God is not everywhere. But the problem is there are verses that imply that God is everywhere. The entire earth is filled with his glory is a verse from Isaiah. So they interpret this and they say that his glory doesn't mean his presence. His glory means his providence. God is looking. God is in control of everywhere. And the metaphor is you have a king in a palace, and outside the palace is a pile of trash. And the king is not on the pile of trash, but he's looking and he knows what's going on in the pile of trash. And if you say the king is in the pile of trash, you're not helping the king. You're just making it worse. It's a disgrace. So when the Baal Shem Tov came and said God is everywhere, people said you're first of all it's heresy. First of all, you're going against the law because the law says there are certain places that are unholy and God does not exist. And second of all, it's an affront to God. And they also had the Arizal to support them because the Arizal talks about the Tzimtzum. The Arizal says the infinite light of God is everywhere. And for God to create the world, he has to create a chalal, a cavity, an empty space where the world can be created. So the implication is that the world is in a space that is devoid of God. But the Hasidim insist otherwise. And they say, no, when the verse says, the entire earth is full of his glory, it means literally Hashem is everywhere. And when the Arizal said God is not everywhere, we'll put that, don't take that literal. Take Isaiah literal, not the Arizal literal. What do they say? It means the difference between holiness and unholiness is not whether Hashem is there. Hashem is everywhere. If Hashem is not somewhere, it can't exist. And they would say that if you say there's a place that can exist without God, that means that's the idolatry. That means there's something that's independent of God's existence. Everything is just an expression of godliness. If God ceases to create it, it ceases to exist. So God happens to be everywhere. So what does it mean that a place is unholy? It means that that space, that item, or that experience covers, completely obscures the spark of God creating it. So the difference between unholy and holy and unholy is not a question of whether is God present, but the question is the creation transparent to the spark of God that's in it? And if something is holy, it means you look at it and you say, I see, this is godliness. You see a guy walking down the street and helping somebody else, you say, I see the spark of God. I see the holiness expressing itself. Then you see that another person going and doing something harmful with their hand, say, I don't see this, I don't see that, I don't see God's presence here. But it doesn't mean that it's not there, it means it's concealed. So that's the difference between holiness and unholiness. So we could say two things. We could say, first of all, we can say that there's space like Egypt, which is unholy, and therefore God will not speak to the prophet, meaning God won't reveal his presence here because the presence is concealed. But we're also going to say that God is everywhere. And sometimes when you overcome the experience and you escape the experience, then you look back and you say, now we see that experience helped us. So now we see that that there was a reason for this. And if you see the reason, then you see that, there was a spark here. So my point here is that both can be true. And so that's the big idea. And the Hasidim would say tzimtzum is not literal. And there's a lot of ink spilled on this in many places, including in the Tanya chapter, in a few places. And this was the big debate. This was the big deal. Later generations, even those who oppose Hasidism, accept the Hasidic view of the tzimtzum, and they say that the tzimtzum is not literal. The students of the Vilna Gaon say, who is opposed to the Hasidim, say that indeed that the tzimtzum is not literal. And we got to the point that many people are saying that the Vilna Gaon himself never meant that tzimtzum was literal. But that's debatable. I'm not going to this beyond my pay grade. It seems like whatever my point is just to show it's so obvious today. It's so obvious to everybody that God is everywhere that it could be that we're writing history. It could be not. It could be, I don't know. But the point here is that's a given today that God is everywhere. But 200 years ago, 250 years ago, this was radical stuff, and this was for many people borderline heresy, because they felt that the moment you're going to say that God is everywhere. By the way, I'm going to shut the recording for a second. So I'm not going to, but don't tell anybody I said this. That you get many people accused Hasidism to be sort of the same idea of Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi, the philosophy of Shabtai Tzvi says that if the Arizal is true, is right, that there's a spark of God everywhere. So even the unholiness is holy, so you can engage in unholiness. So the distinction between good and evil is erased because there's a spark of God everywhere. So there's a very fine line between saying God, everything is created by God, God is everywhere, there's a spark of holiness everywhere, to wiping out the distinction between good and evil, between permitted and prohibited, which is where the Shabtai Tzvi goes. And then people thought that Hasidism was doing the same thing just 100 years later, we're doing the same thing. But the reality is that Hasidism did not. Hasidism is loyal to halacha because both could be true. Yes, there's a spark of God here. Nevertheless, that spark is not accessible. So we separate from it. In fact, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, that the etymology, the meaning of the word asur, prohibited. What does prohibited mean? What's the etymology? What's the meaning? What's the root of the word? So what's prohibited means, I don't know what the etymology in English is, but in Hebrew, literally means tied up, which is a fascinating, and mutar, permitted, is untied, which is an absolutely fascinating description, because I would not choose that as a description of something negative and unholy or prohibited. I would say it's untied. What is untied? What does tied or untied mean? What does locked up or not locked up mean? It sort of doesn't, it seems like it misses the point to describe something that's off limits. Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, no, this is the point. Everything has a spark. The question is the spark, could you access it? Could you elevate it? Could you use it? Then it's untied. If it's a kosher piece of meat, you could elevate that energy and use it for holiness. If it's an unkosher experience, not that it doesn't have a spark, it has a spark, but the spark is tied down, you can't access it. So when you say prohibited, you're actually implying that it does have a spark. The word itself, prohibited, implies that it has a spark. It's just that the spark, I cannot access it. So if I cannot access it, I have to separate from it. But it's not that there's no spark. If I say that something is independent of Hashem, then that's according from the Hasidic perspective, that's idolatry. That means there's a separate source of existence other than God. That's duality. It's not the unity. That's not the oneness. That's not the unity. Going back full circle, when you finish the exile, you discover that there's a spark everywhere. There's angels everywhere. Some angels I can access, some I can't. Some I could engage in, some I can't. Some are so concealed, so I can't speak to God in that scenario. True, but everything has a spark, and everything has a reason. And at that point, exile is not just a result of sin, or in this case, Jacob has to run away because he stole his brother's blessings. If you want to take that perspective, that is a punishment, or Egypt. All negativity is not. It's not just a result of sin, but the sparks there were there for a reason. We're trying to elevate it. There's something that has to be done mystically or psychologically, any angle you're looking at it. But here it's much more than just a punishment, but it's actually an experience of growth. So that is a big subject. We could talk about it for an hour, but just a little bit touching the topic. Go ahead, Steve, please.
Would it be valid to make a distinction between most of Egypt and Shiloh, where Yaakov established schools of learning?
Yeah, so you mean Goshen? Goshen.
Goshen.
Yeah, so I would assume that when it says that Jacob, that Moshe left the city, he means the city where Pharaoh lived, and the Jewish people had their own area, Goshen. So there, I'm sure the prophecy would be in effect. You could pray to God there. There's the intensity of the Egyptian society, where the unholiness was, where the idol worship was. Moshe keeps saying, "Could say to me in that ear, when I leave, I'll pray." How can you pray there, right? There's certain places that, according to the law, you can't pray. If you're in a street and the street is dirty, you can't pray there. Does it mean God's not here? So some people would say yes, but the Hasidim say no. It just means that the holiness of God is covered and concealed. So this is not a place to pray. But this is a big topic. Tzimtzum, whether God is everywhere, the idea of holiness and unholiness, this is a big deal. So we just covered 500 years of history in about 10 minutes. So we saved a lot of time.
So you have another idea for JLM.
There should be one. I mean, you have the book, you have people talk about this at great length. Gershom Shalom's book is sort of the, what is it, something trends in Jewish mysticism. This is what he's dealing with, the Arizal, Shabtai Tzvi, and Hasidism, and how the Arizal is going to, if you misread it, you're going to end up with Shabtai Tzvi, and the Hasidism is sort of a correction of that. So the idea that there's a spark in everything could be dangerous if you take that to mean, so everything is kosher, so everything is permitted, so everything is okay, right? You have to be able to understand that everything has a spark of God, but the evil is still evil because that spark is not manifest. It's not in control. It's not expressing itself. It's trapped. It's in exile.
But the Shabtai Tzvi was more, correct me if I'm wrong, represented himself as more of a messianic figure.
Correct. And he says the messianic era is here, and therefore all the sparks have all been sort of quote unquote elevated, and therefore everything now is permitted. At the end, you get to
everything's permitted.
At some point, again, we're not sure exactly what he said and what he didn't say, what his followers said, but at some point when he converts, for example, so his followers say, yes, we're doing things that are against the law because we're going to find those sparks and elevate them. And eventually all sparks will be elevated in the Messianic era. The question is, if you do it too early, you're in trouble. So you're off the cliff. But these are ideas that you have to be very careful. You have to tread carefully. Because from saying that everything has a spark of God to saying that everything is okay, it's a very short distance. You have to be careful not to cross that distance. And that distance is the law. The law tells us what's permitted, what's prohibited. But again, Hasidic reading is that in the word prohibited, the etymology of that word itself is telling you something is tied up. What's tied up? Piece of pork is tied up. What do you mean it's tied up? It's prohibited. No, it's tied up. What's that? The spark is tied up. You can't have access to good that's in here. So that's why it's prohibited. That doesn't mean you should do it. And that doesn't mean there's no good here. There's good here, but you can't access it. So both could be true.
Well, I think the interesting thing about trade is that God forbid if your life, if you were starving to death, you would then I would imagine be elevating the trade.
So then it's not that, and if the law says it's okay, then it's okay. And even if there's always a way of someone who sins and does teshuvah, ironically, will elevate the spark of the prohibited thing. Meanwhile, the tzaddik is not able to elevate that spark because he never sinned, never did teshuvah. But you see that if I say that statement and you put it in the New York Times, the headline could be, eat as much pork you want so you'll be able to elevate the sparks. So there's a very fine line between, engaging in the negativity and returning to God and elevating. When you do that, you're elevating those sparks that normally cannot be elevated. And Torah itself tells you that you could do teshuvah and elevate the sparks, right? But you have to be very careful. That's the danger, and that's why this is dynamite, and that's why people were very afraid of Hasidism. They thought the same thing that happened with Shabtai Tzvi would reoccur. But now we have the track record to show that it's not the case.
Did Shabtai Tzvi die in bed, or was he executed?
I don't know. I think that I don't know. I don't think he was executed. I don't think he was. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't think he was executed. I don't remember. I shouldn't speak.
I think
He converted, right?
He converted, but did he?
I don't know. I'm not an expert. Don't know. Good. We'll
Maybe
ask Google.
not.
We'll ask Google in a few minutes. We'll ask Wikipedia. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. I think that the discussion is very relevant for everyday life, because every day we need to decide, and it's not as simple all the time. When it comes to food, it may be simpler than when it comes to human interactions, which spark we can elevate, which we cannot. So to that point, going back to my initial question, the fact that Jacob left, does it mean that he elevated all the sparks from there?
Yeah, that's why he left, and that's why we spoke about this a little bit last week. That when he sees that circumstances don't allow him to stay, the assumption is that he has to leave, and that's what we said that the Hasidic. We quoted the Hasidic book. I forget which one, not a Chabad book, but a Hasidic book nonetheless. That says that he tells Laban, "I want to go," and Laban says, "Stay. I'll give you sheep." So he says, "Okay, fine. I'm going to stay." She's so anxious to go home. How could he just convince you to stay? So the Hasidic answer is that he sees that there's more opportunity here. If there's more opportunity here, I have to stay. In fact, what the Hasidim say is that Laban chases Jacob. And when he chases Jacob, he adds pages to the Torah. Think about how many verses were added because Laban chased Jacob. If he would not have chased him, the Torah would be shorter. So the Hasidim say that Jacob left some sparks in the house of Laban. He didn't finish getting everything he needs to get from Laban. And when Laban chases Jacob, and they come and they eat breakfast and they have eat bread together, it's because Laban is bringing Jacob those additional sparks that those experiences that he still could have in Haran, but he forgot them. He missed those opportunities, so they came and chased him. So when you get to the mysticism, you can't run away from the sparks. Every spark has a person that is supposed to elevate that spark, and your life experiences are you led to those life experiences because your soul is craving to those sparks to elevate those sparks. And if you try to run away from something, it may chase you, which is what happened to Laban. And I can't get away from this. Why can't I? Because obviously there's something here that I need to elevate. So that's the mystical perspective. You can't go anywhere without being cognizant that there's holiness here that I need to interact with.
So does the Midrash talk about what happens to Laban's sons in relation to Jewish history?
Not that I know of. The only Midrash that I can think of is mentioned also before is that Bilam would be the descendant of Laban. And when he comes to curse the Jews, he's breaking the pact. He's breaking the pact. Here's the pact. We're not going to cross this marker for evil. And at some point, King David goes to battle, sends Yoav, his general, to battle to those countries, wherever it is, Turkey or southern Iraq, and he wants to conquer that area. And the people there send him, according to the Midrash, send him a script, and they said, "You can't come here because your great-grandfather made the pact that we're not going to harm each other." And according to the Midrash, if I remember correctly, I haven't seen this in a while. According to the Midrash, Yoav, David's general, comes back to David with this problem. You got a legal problem on our hands. The lawyers are not letting us proceed. And David says, yes, but they broke the pact first. And that's with Bilam coming to curse the Jews. So the Midrash is reading the historic conflicts between the Jewish people and the people of Aram as a continuation of this Laban, Jacob relationship, but it's not friendly anymore at this point. In other words, there's certainly a it's more of a cutoff. It's more of a separation than any conventional brit, conventional covenant.
Did the language of Iran carry forth to the Aramaic that was spoken?
My guess is that there's overlap. In fact, the countries that you can go to Haran today and speak Aramaic. In fact, there's a Chabad rabbi in Turkey who has actually done that, and he has post videos of the locals in Haran. He went and found the place speaking Aramaic. So, is it exactly the Aramaic that Laban spoke? I don't know, but it's probably closely related indeed. Okay, Mazel Tov. We finished the parsha of Vayetze. Now we're going to proceed to the next parsha, Vayishlach. So this is a new parsha, Genesis chapter.
I'll go get the bottle.
Okay, the bottle, yes. Genesis chapter 32, verse 4. Maybe we'll share the screen for the sake of the occasion. Okay, so we're reading verse 4. Jacob sent angels ahead of him to his brother Esau, to the land of Seir, the field of Edom. So in other words, he comes toward Israel and he realizes that he has a brother and he has to deal with his brother. Now, he sends messengers to his brother. Where is his brother? His brother is in the land of Seir, the field of Edom. His brother was not even in Israel. His brother was in the land of Edom, which is, I guess, southern Jordan. So they meet up. They're going to meet up sort of at the border of Israel, very close to the Jordan River. But if you think about Jacob coming from east to west toward Israel, and where he's going to be now, Esau is south of him, right? Think about he's cutting through Jordan, really. He's coming through Jordan, going toward the Jordan River. Later, he's going to pass the river Yabok, which is sort of opposite Jerusalem, on the line of Jerusalem across the Jordan. So sort of the center of Israel. So he's coming east to west, and Esau is south of Israel. So he sends messengers to Esau, and Esau is sort of coming north now, and they're going to meet up sort of at the border of Israel. Why is Esau not in Israel? So we already read it in the end of the previous parsha, before Vayetze, that it said as follows. It said, no, it didn't say it. It doesn't say. I thought it says it doesn't say it explicitly. But the bottom line is that we know that he's not living in Israel. He's living in the land of Edom. After he meets up with his brother, he goes back to the land of Edom. So Esau really checks out of Israel a little bit after Jacob steals the blessings. And the question is, how come? And the answer is because he doesn't want to be in Israel. The way Rashi explains it, we mentioned this last week at some point, that there's a metaphor where you tell the bee, I don't want your sting and I don't want your honey. Right? So if you have something that has good or bad and you want either, you say, in Yiddish they would say, tu minus kontayvus, don't do me any favors, don't give me your sting, don't give me your honey. So Israel is a mixed bag. Yes, you can get the promise, a divine promise of the land of Israel. But there's also the sting that comes along. What's the sting? The prophecy that God tells Abraham that your descendants will be foreigners and enslaved for 400 years before they come back. So you want to get to Israel, no problem, but you have to pay the price. The price is the slavery. So Esau is not interested in the slavery and he's not interested in the reward. So he checks out. He doesn't want his destiny to be with the story, with the prophecy of Abraham. So that's just telling you Esau's state of mind. Now Jacob is going to play on that a little bit, at least according to some opinions. So Jacob sends messengers, and he wants to really see what's happening. He wants to scout out where his brother is up to, and he sends a message. And of course, we have to decipher the message and say, what is he really saying? So that's our job in verse 5 and 6. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. I just want to comment on the character development. We said in the previous parsha that first Jacob encountered the place where were angels, and now at the end of the parsha, angels encountered him.
Right.
And now has his own angels to send ahead of him. So
Yeah.
he was empowered
Yeah.
to the point that is it like the same kind of angels, the messengers, angels? So this is maybe the appearance of the angels in the previous parsha and power.
That's very good. That's very good. That's one of the problems. That's one of the reasons why you would say angels. You see, Jacob sent the angels ahead of him. The Hebrew word is malachim. Malachim could mean has two meanings. A malach could be an angel, but the angel only gets its name angel, ein malach, because malach could also mean messenger. So you can really read this, Jacob sends messengers ahead of him. This translation, both translations, both the one we have on the screen and the art scroll, takes the more mystical interpretation and says Jacob sends angels. They didn't have to say it. They could have said messengers. A malach could be a messenger. It can be an angel. The reason why they do it is because of Rashi. Rashi quotes the Medrash, the Genesis Rabbah, and Rashi says malachi mamash, literal angels, not messengers, but angels. So that's Rashi's interpretation, not the simple interpretation. It's the Midrashic interpretation. So that's how it trickled down to the translation on the screen as well as the art scroll. But one of the reasons why Rashi takes this is some people say is because the juxtaposition. He sees angels and he says angels, same word. So you're going to tell me this word means messengers, and one verse before the angels meant literal angels. Right? So it seems like the juxtaposition implies that we're talking about angels, and therefore we say that Jacob sends angels, even though the simple meaning can simply be messengers. So I'm just supporting your point that we're continuing the story of the angels.
Rabbi, I thought only Hashem had the ability to direct angels.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to your question. I don't know. I guess he's a tzaddik. I don't know. I guess he's a tzaddik, and he has.
So is there an implication that we could all send angels?
It could be, yeah.
We have to become tzaddikim first.
I'll try.
Yeah, I mean, if the story is, yeah, I guess so. We have to expand. We have to think about what that would mean, what that would look like. But yes, the short answer is yes. What the yes means, we have to figure it out.
And we need to extract all the sparks before we do, right? And we never, because we don't real angels in real life. So
we're certainly extracting sparks. According to the mystical perspective, every time we interact with the world and we'll do a mitzvah, we elevate, we do something good. We're elevating that spark and bringing it back to holiness. So that we're all in the elevating spark business. The question is sending angels to Esau. What exactly does that mean? Where does the pshat end and the medrash begin? It could be he sent both. It could be he sent people, but he also empowered them with the spiritual protection of the angels. Right? When the medrash says angels, what does that mean? Does it mean literally, or does it mean it's adding an additional perspective to the literal meaning? In other words, he could have sent a messenger and empowered him with the energy of an angel, or he could have sent him an angel, which is way more mystical, right? So you got to figure out how to read that. Yes, go ahead, Neil.
So what's it to know if he sends a malachim, like a messenger, and a shliach?
A shliach is an agent, opposed to a messenger, an agent. So a shliach has more of a legal description. It's that person is acting for you on your behalf. It's an extension of yourself. A malach is not necessarily in that sense. A messenger, I say, could you do me a favor? Could you put the mail in the mailbox? Okay, so you're doing something for me. And a shaliach is a legal entity But in Judaism, a legal entity, the legal is also a spiritual entity. In other words, it represents a spiritual truth that sometimes I could be an extension of you. I can act on your behalf. I could do a mitzvah for you, certain mitzvah that you can do through a shliach. So it's much more than just a malach. It's just more than a messenger. It's the ramification is in the legal realm where your agent is considered an extension of yourself. I'm not sure a malach has that angle.
So why does Chabad send shaliach and not malachim?
So that's a good question. I guess the spiritual interpretation is that you are an extension of the sender. So it's not like your own identity. It's not like I'm here, I have what to say. It's not me. I'm an extension of the message. I'm an extension of the teachings. I'm an extension of the Rebbe. But it's not that I have my own identity. There's a certain empowerment that comes from that. As opposed to a malach, I'm myself. So when the Rebbe is sending you, is he sending you because of who you are or because you are a conduit? Right? So a shliach is much more of an extension of the original.
Well, it's probably a combination of both.
Yes.
He's sending you because he feels you have the ability.
Oh, so the Rebbe talked about that and talked about the idea that in halacha, the concept of it, there's a eved, there's a servant, a slave. That you just follow you just follow directives. That's not a shaliach. Shaliach is you have to use your own judgments. The whole reason why you send an agent is you send an agent because if you knew exactly what's going to happen, if you knew exactly what steps needed to be done, you just send a robot, you send a servant. Say, if this happens, press A, if that happens, press B, but then you don't have any initiative. So you send an agent or you empower an agent, even legally, is because I don't know what's going to happen. And I expect that you will use your own judgment and your personality and your frame of reference to decide what the right path is in that scenario. So you're absolutely correct that you need the person's own personality and initiative. But what are you deciding? Let's say, for example, I'm your agent, you appoint me an agent, let's say to, as a medical, what do they call it? A medical proxy. Right. So it's not that I decide what I think I should do based on my values. So I use my judgment to figure out what are your values. See what I'm saying? So it's both. On one hand, I'm an extension of you. I'm operating on your behalf. On the other hand, of course, you choose me because you want my judgment, but not my judgment. It's not that you empower me because of my values. It's you want my judgment to execute your values. So it's sort of both ideas. Okay, we'll read a little bit. We have 5 minutes left. I want to read verse 5 and read the Rashi and read the 2 interpretations of Rashi, and then read that beautiful, beautiful Kli Yakar who says, if I had the power, I would erase 2 words in Rashi and make it not 2 interpretations, but 1 interpretation. If I were not afraid of my friends, he writes. Okay, there's peer pressure. Back then also, even righteous people have peer pressure. Okay, so let's see. Let's run through this quickly. We'll try to end on time, as usual. Okay, I'm just going to show the Rashi. So, verse 5, he sends angels or messengers to his brother. Okay. Verse 5, and he commanded them, saying, so shall you say to my master, to Esau, thus said your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban, and I have tarried until now. Im Lavan Garti, I have sojourned with Laban. Sojourn means I live there. In modern Hebrew, lagur can mean to live. I live. But in biblical Hebrew, lagur means to live as a sojourner. You're living as someone who's a foreigner. You're not really settled here. So when he's telling Esau, I sojourned with Laban. I lived with Laban, but I did not settle there. I'm there temporarily. And I tarried until now. Okay. Says Rashi, what is he really telling? Is this breaking news? You were with Laban for the last 20 years. Everybody knew this. Like, what are you telling your brother? So there's verse 5. Verse 5, verse 6 says, and I have acquired oxen and donkeys, flocks, manservants, and maidservants, and I have sent to tell you this to my master to find favor in your eyes, alluding to the fact that he's going to send him gifts in a moment, gifts of livestock, etc. So we'll deal with 6 later. But verse 5, what does he say? This is the message. I sojourned with Laban and I tarried till now. That's not breaking news. We know that. What is he telling him? Esau knows he ran away to get married. You think, news didn't travel that fast, but he's in one place for 20 years, just a few hundred kilometers. People knew what happened. He's getting married, he got kids. I'm sure he sent postcards back home to say that he had a child or children. So what is he really telling him? So Rashi gives us two interpretations. Number one, Garti, I did not become an officer or a dignitary, but a stranger. It is not worthwhile for you to hate me on account of your father's blessing, which he blessed me. You shall be a master over your brothers, for it was not fulfilled in me. Tanchuma, that's what the Medrash Tanchuma says. That's the first interpretation. What is he saying? He's alluding to Jacob and to Esau, and he's saying, don't get so, you're upset at me. Why? Because I stole the blessings. Don't worry, the blessings didn't work. What's the most important part of the blessings? You're going to be having gvir la'achecha. You're going to be a master, a ruler over your brothers. It never happened. I'm a ger, I'm a foreigner, I'm a sojourner. I have no stability. I'm certainly not ruling over other people. That is what he's telling us about. Don't be so jealous that the blessing didn't work. Now, it's strange. That's according to Rashi, according to Medrash. It's strange that he would say, what is he saying? He's saying our father's blessings don't work. So is he disparaging the blessing? How could that be? The father blessed. He's a righteous man. The blessing should occur. So some people read it as follows. What he's saying is, the blessings didn't work because the blessings were not intended for me. I stole your blessings, but when our father blessed me, he thought he's blessing you. So the blessing went to you. Whether or not he meant it is another story, but that's what he's obviously afraid. We'll see later he was afraid. So he's telling him, don't get so upset that I had the blessing. I stole your blessing. The blessings did not happen. I did not become a ruler. I'm a sojourner. Okay, that's one interpretation. Davar acher, another interpretation. Garti, I sojourned, has the numerical value of 613. This is to say, I lived with the wicked Laban, but I kept the 613 commandments and did not learn from his evil deeds. So according to the second interpretation, when he says, Im Lavan Garti, I sojourned with Laban, what he's saying, I was with Laban, but Garti, I kept the 613, because Garti is the numerical value of 613.
How can you keep 613 if the temple didn't exist?
Good question. Good question. So it could be, it means I kept it, when you say 613, you mean the entirety of the Torah that's possible to be kept at that point. Good question. But the Kli Yakar says, I don't understand what's happening here. In the first verse, the first interpretation, he's being humble. He's saying, I did not become a master, a minister. I'm just a sojourner. He's minimizing himself. He's trying to deflect. Don't get so jealous of me. I'm not making himself small. The second half of the second interpretation is he's saying he's being arrogant. I kept the whole Torah. First of all, what are you trying to do? Impress Esau? You kept the whole Torah. What are you trying to do? Just to brag to Esau? It's not like Esau is going to be impressed with that. So we have it's 10:30. We'll take another few seconds and say what the Kli Yakar says. Kli Yakar says, if I were not afraid of my friends, I would erase these two words, davar acher, another explanation. It's all one explanation. I did not become, I was a sojourner. I did not become a minister, meaning our father's blessings did not occur. And I kept the whole Torah. Why is that important to know? Because maybe you could say that really Jacob stole the blessings. Now Jacob should get the blessings. The reason why the blessings did not come into fruition is because Jacob was not deserving. So Jacob has to say, I was deserving. I kept the Torah. And nevertheless, the blessings didn't happen. So that's proof that the blessings were not intended to me. They were intended for you. Because when our father blessed us, he had you in mind. So that's the Kli Yakar's interpretation. He deletes another interpretation, says, because otherwise, what are you telling Esau? I'm a sojourner. I kept the whole Torah. Like, what's the point? Just a brag. But according to the Kli Yakar, it's a critical point here. I kept the Torah, meaning I am deserving of the blessing, but the blessings did not come into fruition because it was not intended for me. And if you look at verse 6, where he says what he had, I had ox, I had donkey, I had sheep, I had servants, I had maidservants. He lists the whole list of his blessings. Rashi points out that what do they all have in common? All these items were not in the language of the blessing of Isaac to his son. What did he say in the blessing? Dew of the heaven, fat of the earth. And you'll be a ruler over your siblings, your brothers. Sheep, oxen, donkeys. These are not blessings of produce. They're not blessings of the earth, the fertility of the earth. They're not the fat of the land, and they're not the dew of the heaven. So again, that's Jacob saying, don't be so upset that I stole the blessings because they really didn't come into fruition. I will continue this conversation and continue analyzing the message that Jacob sends to his brother Esau next week. And of course, next week we also have the response and the fear that Jacob experiences when he sees the response, and then his reaction to that fear, and the story unfolds. Asher Koyach, thank you everybody for joining. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Only good news. Thank you.